Hi everyone. So I would be doing my mini theory presentations on environmental identity theory and collective impact theory. So to jump right into it, so environmental identity theory has many definitions, but I'm gonna go over three main ones that they use in like a literature. And so to start off, this one is essentially it can be described as a construct that demonstrates the extent to which people perceive themselves as a part of nature, incorporated in it and defined by it. So there's like three main things really that can define somebody's character about having a strong environmental identity or a weak one, and we'll get into strong versus weak in the next slide. But essentially, like, these three main factors are their attitudes toward the environment friendly behavior, so how they act, not just what they say about the environment but how they act, and then how much they know about what's going on around them in the environment, so their environmental knowledge. And these three main things make up their environmental awareness, which is like the biggest factor of environmental identity theory, as it's the main point of understanding like where you identify in, like if you have a strong environmental identity theory or a weak one. So yeah, this is one of the main definitions, I guess you could say, for environmental identity theory that a lot of people go by and a lot of literature goes by to kind of explain it and how people are perceiving nature. I lied. So the next slide after this one is actually going to be where I jump into a strong environmental identity or weak one. However, these are two other definitions that are highly utilized when talking about environmental identity theory. So essentially how a person's sense of self and connection to nature influences their actions and behaviors, and how a person's environmental identity is formed by society's values and codes of conduct. So um, off, off the surface, like environmental identity theory, like the concept of it sounds very like subjective, because people can have so many attitudes and think like, well, I think I do have a strong environmental identity because I do this and this. But what defines that, what those certain characteristics or actions as being strong or weak, So off the surface, it sounds very subjective, but we're going to get into how environmental identity theory has become more objective and we can actually measure it. But essentially, yeah, it is how a person's environmental identity is formed by society's values and codes of conduct and their sense of self. So, including like how they believe they are in the environment and what they're doing, their actions about what they're doing in the environment, that defines it, as well as society's values and codes of conduct. So, what is their community saying about their environment, and rules about, for example, picking up trash or anything like that. So the combination of the two helps helps the theory start become more objective, and where we can actually measure it and see where people lie in that spectrum. Okay, so I've kind of been going over it a little bit already, but essentially there are three key aspects. So again, the self concept, essentially your connectedness to nature. So how you personally feel, if you've had a lot of positive experiences within the environment or negative experiences, so your personal connection to nature. And then the environmental identity, which forms that, is really from society's values and codes of conduct. So this comes into play with the strong environmental ID versus the weak. And so essentially, strong environmental identity is your pro-environmental behaviors. So what are you doing that is like helping the environment in a positive way? So, like taking out the trash every week, and, doing cleanups, or, community cleanups or whatever, like being pro-environmental. And of course, weak would be the opposite. So being anti-environmental and showing anti-environmental behaviors. So not caring or not wanting to be involved in like community cleanups, or not abiding by the society's values and codes of conduct that's in place within your community and society. And so yeah, and then the third key aspect is actually an environmental identity scale, which is where we can actually like measure this now and have a more objective stance on the theory, and on people's environmental identities, and actually put into place things that will actually be able to say, like, okay, they do have a strong environmental identity based on these criteria and characteristics. So again, as it explains basically itself, it's just the scale measures someone's sense of connectedness with nature and their interdependence within a natural world. So Susan Clayton was actually, I believe, the first person that kind of came up with like a measurable tool for environmental identity theory, and that's this picture on the right hand side. This is the scale she came up with, and I believe this is from 2003, a paper she did in 2003, where she really introduced this scale. And so essentially, there was way more questions in this. I just took a snippet of it, but she allowed participants to answer these questions, all these questions, and I believe she rated it on a scale of 1 to 10, where they would say if they really agree with these statements or not. I mean, as you can see, for example, like even question one, like, I spend a lot of time in natural settings. Engaging environmental behaviors is important to me. So things that are like really define people's characters and of how they feel about the environment, and if they do or if they're willing to be pro-environmental or not. And so this was actually able to really take off and be utilized a lot in literature from 2003 on, to really have a tool to measure like strong or weak environmental identity. And I'll get into it later, but there's actually a revised version in 2024 of this scale, of this measurable tool, and it focuses more on kids, because environmental identity theory was originally focused for adults and like how they feel about their environment. And so now in more modern times, they're trying to understand it in a kid's perspective, because honestly, if you think about it, that's probably where your behaviors, attitudes came from. Whatever you saw your parents doing, that's what you're going to do or think about a lot of things, not just the environment. So now there's a revised version of her scale, kind of more catered towards kids and how that would be shaped within kids' lives. And so that's really cool, that I'll get into later. So there has been some weaknesses and criticisms of the environmental identity scale. Some major ones have been limited scale representation, limited focus, superficial operationalization, and limited research on children. So starting with limited scale representation, Clayton's original scale or model, that was based on all of those questions that I was showing in the slide previously. They only represent certain aspects of environmental identity. Essentially, when she created the model, she included factors including the salience of identity, the identification of oneself as a group member, agreement with an ideology associated within a group, and the positive emotions associated with the collective. And so those questions were based on one of those four elements and like characteristics of the environmental identity theory within the scale, but it was only based on one of those four. Like each question was based on one of those four aspects, and so those four aspects are not all of the aspects of environmental identity, and so there is often limited scale representation and limited focus. The existing scales either focus on individual or social aspect and not really both. And so there has been limited focus on some renditions of her original scale that hasn't really focused on both of them together, both aspects of individual and social aspect together. And then superficial operationalization. So the scale often only measures intentions to engage in smaller behaviors like recycling, which may not represent the full impact on the environment. And then also there's been limited research on children. Again, I think I briefly mentioned in earlier slides that there's been renditions of this scale, and recently, as you can see in this picture in 2024, there's actually like a remodel, but considering the environmental identity of children. And so this diagram was designed in the context of early childhood education for a tool for caretakers and educators to better understand and support children's environmental identity. And so things are, the scale is still shaping and taking forms of its own, and getting better and stronger every year, whenever somebody really does another study using the theory and everything. But there's definitely still weaknesses and criticisms within that can be worked on and looked at and studied. But yeah, looking at how the environmental identity is in children has become a big thing recently, but the process of that that is definitely like lifelong because it starts when they're young. So, yeah. So, speaking about papers utilizing the theory, it has been utilized in the context of environmental science and social science, of course, but working together, in environmental aspects. So, this paper is called You Really See It Environmental Identity Shifts Through Interacting with a Climate Change Impacted Glacier Landscape. And so, basically, this paper. Realized that there has been little work done on how experiencing a climate change impacted landscape can support environmental identity shifts. And so this study wanted to explore the shifts in the context of a wilderness science program for youth, and youth that live in a glacier dominated landscape with the vision of having long-term change. So it's kind of taking on the role of looking at a child's perspective of environmental identity. And so it used a qualitative approach to investigate the environmental identity development. And they actually relied on Clayton's environmental identity scale in her model in that 2003 paper. And that part of the clip I showed you from her scale with all the questions, they use that as a theoretical construct. And so there was two aspects of environmental identity that shifted the most, and they found that was relatedness to the natural environment, and pro-environmental motivation. So they found that ultimately, educators can privilege these aspects to support environmental identity shifts, and that it's very important to personally witness a visibly climate impacted landscape. And because, like, visibly witnessing, like, oh my gosh, like, things are really changing and happening in our environment, this can be very, very powerful in promoting better environmental stewardship in response to the climate crisis. And so, yeah, it's this theory cannot just be used in like social science, but also in environmental science and interdisciplinary ecology. And I think that's really cool. Okay, so that was environmental identity theory. I feel like I actually spoke about that for a little while. So I'll try to run through collective impact theory quicker. But this is collective impact theory, and I also thought this was a really interesting theory to look up. So essentially, the main like definitions of the theory and what is used heavily throughout literature is that it brings people together from different sectors in a collaborative approach to solve complex social issues. And so it requires a systemic approach to social impact, focusing on the relationships between organizations and the progress towards shared objectives. And so this is actually a, seemingly a very new, I guess you could say, theory. It was first introduced in a 2011 Stanford Social Innovation Review article. I guess I shouldn't say new, because it has probably been used. They just never put a title on it, of saying it's called collective impact, but it probably has been, utilized in just different ways throughout social science and probably even environmental science. But it was officially first introduced in a 2011 Stanford Social Innovation Review article. So the collective impact theory is more of like a model with five conditions. The only kind of diagram I was kind of able to find was these three bubbles in the middle, essentially showing that certain characteristics want to be utilized to be able to get to a shared value. So essentially the collective impact model is five conditions that the theory is really based upon: a common agenda, a shared measurement, continuous communication, backbone support organizations, and mutually reinforcing activities. So for common agenda, really trying to get stakeholders to come to a shared vision for the initiative and agree on actions to create change. So really being able to have good communications to actually get to like a common idea, a shared value, a shared vision, to help move forward in the initiative and efforts of the project or issue. And so that's going to take a lot of communication, right? So continuous communication, having regular meetings to build trust between stakeholders and to build partnerships, to really be able to have a stronger collaborative, and then shared measurement so that all participants agree on ways to measure the success and report on it. So not so like plans and ideas are great, but how are we going to measure these things? How are we going to move forward with the process and have it be successful so then we can report back on it, and then we can continuously revise and make the initiative and efforts better. So having just a way where everybody agrees that this is the way things will be measured in all accounts. And also backbone and support organizations. Again, having that communication and building trust to be able to form lasting partnerships that preserve each partner's unique identity. So being able to find a way where everybody feels heard and making sure like everybody's having a say in the shared vision, to be able to come to a consensus. And then mutually reinforcing activities. So within these meetings, to build trust, be able to set expectations around goals, assessments, activities, and resources so we can get to like a place where we all agree on a certain measure. So all of these five conditions are used continuously and intertwined within each other. And this is like an ongoing process, right? Like it all sounds it can sound pretty basic and just on the surface, but this is each of these conditions, each step is like being revised so many times in the actual process that people were to use this model, because it's not just going to happen the first time where everybody agrees. I mean, if it does, that's amazing, but so it's again all kind of centered on trying to find a shared value and just continuously revising these things and processes to get to that point, that shared value. So like the middle kind of Venn diagram is like emerging business strategies, societal needs and innovation hotspots, and new corporate capabilities are all trying to be centered on a shared value. So there can be many weaknesses and criticisms of this theory. As you probably were putting together from the five different conditions, there's many gaps and opportunities for people to not agree. And so, four main weaknesses and criticisms is that it can be difficult for multiple organizations to agree on a common goal. So, bringing a lot of people together in a lot of organizations, that's a lot of different ideas, perspectives, attitudes, beliefs. And so it can be very difficult to actually have everybody agree on a common agenda. So again, that's why that's like the main focus of the five conditions is really to end at just a shared goal. Even if both parties don't necessarily like the end result, but that we can that both parties can end up being like, okay, at least both sides kind of agree that we should move kind of towards this, even if it's not happening in our way completely that we wanted to, or the other side's way completely, but really like arriving at just like a shared goal. And so that can be very, very difficult with different types of organizations and people. And so, yeah, that can be very a big weakness and criticism. Also, coordinating efforts can be very complex. These organizations and the people that work on these different issues do have like very high roles, or they can have very high roles in their career and in their job. So like it can be very hard coordinating just times and scheduling, which is I guess you could honestly say that the very first step, because if you can't meet, then how is anything going to be able to be talked about and get to a common goal, So coordinating efforts can become very complex and challenging when you have so many stakeholders and organizations and individuals involved. And so yeah, that can really be a weakness to this theory. And also, initiatives are resource intensive, so the funding can be hard and challenging, especially big projects that are regional. Or even like global, or like working on global issues. They require a lot of money, and so even getting everybody on the same page of that's what they want to put their money towards, it can be very challenging to secure funding. And then also resistance to changing established practices that don't work anymore. So a lot of organizations, they all have like a mission statement, and they're very stuck in, this is the traditional way to go about reaching that mission statement. And so it can be very hard because because there's so many different types of people and organizations trying to come together to reach a shared goal. There's many different beliefs and values and perspectives that have been ingrained in people for a while. And so, like, bringing up new ideas where it's potentially total opposite from what they have been doing or what they're used to, it can be hard for people to accept change. And so that's also a very, very big thing, big weakness and criticism, is that, like, a lot of people are, like, resistant to change. So even if there is an idea that could be really good, people might not want to do it just because they don't feel comfortable or feel safe about that change. So that can be a big criticism of the theory. So although there can be many weaknesses and criticisms, if actually used correctly, and people really have open minds, it can create like a really amazing project. So for example, the USGS did a partnership using the collective impact model, where they applied that approach, those 5 conditions, to address a non-native species. And so essentially, they addressed the invasion of a non-native plant species in the Great Lakes. And so the researchers at the U.S. Geological Survey, the USGS, part of their branch of the Great Lakes Science Center, partnered with the Great Lakes Commission in 2012 to establish the Great Lakes Collaborative. And so this collaborative is a regional scale partnership that was established to improve the collaboration among the stakeholders and increase the effectiveness of the non-native plant species management and research initiatives. So instead of like using a traditional partnership, they actually ended up trying to use this collective impact model to engage more stakeholders and align their resources to address the regional challenge. So again, just like the model was saying, like what I was explaining the model to be, is like they're really trying to reach toward a common shared goal and agenda. And so they wanted to move toward a broadly accepted common agenda where agencies as well as individuals could better align their actions and actually create real progress to continuously produce and protect healthy, diverse ecosystems from all the damage caused by these non-native plant species. And so, yeah, this collective impact model, if used correctly and really used where people are all in and have open minds, I think can really be powerful and efficient for not just social science, but natural resource efforts and studies. And so I thought that was really cool how it actually really did work and really could be useful if used well. So that is the collective impact theory and environmental identity theory in a nutshell. Um, Thank you guys for listening. I also forgot to mention during the slides for the environmental identity theory, and this previous slide for the collective impact theory. But I did put those major citations if you saw. Of major, like, just people that have been very impactful and progressive in using these theories and progressing these theories forward. So if you guys want to go back and look at those on those slides, the last slide of the environmental identity theory and this previous slide for the collective impact theory, they were just major citations of people who have been very big in both theories. And yeah, these are my references, and thank you for listening.